Okay, so you hopefully are looking at this slide here and thinking, yeah, I'm on the right webinar. So this is very much the first of our ReOpen webinar series regarding reopening of facilities in terms of COVID and making it COVID secure. We've got a number of different experts on board to answer some of the most commonly asked questions around both cleaning, sanitization, and risk assessments as well. And we'll be introducing those very shortly. Just to start with, a little bit of housekeeping. So as I mentioned, we are recording this webinar so that we can make it available to as many people as possible, particularly over the next few weeks, which potentially are going to be an incredibly important few weeks for the sector as we prepare for that point of reopening once it's announced. You are all on microphone mute. However, we want to keep it an interactive session, so please do use the chat box function to ask questions, add comments, and we'll certainly do our very best to respond to those questions. In terms of webinar rules, to make this run as smoothly as possible, we ask that obviously we are muted, but within the chat box there is no swearing or rude language. We aren't using annotation functions throughout this session, so that's not going to be necessary, and there'll be no share screens apart from potentially the expert panel that we've got. Anyone breaking these rules, we will unfortunately have to remove you from the session. And at the very bottom, I actually had every day is a school day. So I've never heard the term until earlier this morning, Zoom bombing. Apparently it is a thing. And just that bottom sentence gives you an outline of should that happen, what may be the consequence of that. In terms of the expert panel that we've got on board with us today, so we're delighted to have both Gill Twell and Ian Warren from Right Directions. So great to have you on board, Gill and Ian. So Gill is the head of development and Ian is the head of health and safety. And we've also got Christian Harris from Slip Safety Services as well. So I'm sure Tara will introduce you to our expert panel a little bit more very shortly. And just finally, before I do hand over to Tara, in terms of the format that we're working with for this afternoon, we've been collating questions from facilities across the sector and from our experts who've each been delivering a number of different webinars to facilities up and down the country, and we've collated a lot of questions, and hopefully we're going to do our very best to answer those questions, give you clarity, and hopefully bust a few myths as well that may be just out there as it stands. As I mentioned, we want to keep it interactive, so please continue to use the chat function to ask questions of our experts throughout the webinar. And then we'll do our best once each of our experts have run through their questions to answer any questions from the floor, and then we'll wrap up at the end. After the webinar, you will receive a summary of the questions and the responses as well. So if you want to take notes, please do so. However, we will email through to you the information that we go through within the session so that you've got it to hand, along with a number of useful links which you may find helpful over the coming weeks. And we'll also be asking for feedback after the session as well. So you will receive an email from us just asking for your thoughts and comments on how you found this webinar. So that is enough from me. Tara, I'm going to hand over to you if that's okay. And I'll stick myself on mute. So over to you, Tara.
Thanks, Phil, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Phil said most of what I was going to say in my intro because he's that good, so we can get cracking. Normally these webinars are about an hour long. Now we've allowed an hour and a half for this. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to use an hour and a half, but As with many of you, I've sat on a number of webinars over the last couple of months, and I find that we tend to run out of time for questions. So we've allowed a little bit more time. But as Phil's mentioned already, anything that you put in the question box that we can't get round to today, we'll get the experts to answer them and send that transcript out to every single one of you. We'll also put it on our ReOpening website as well. Phil, if he hasn't done so already, will put the link to our ReOpening guidance page in the chat box so you can cut and paste it. Lovely, thank you. So let me just tell you why we've decided to run this type of webinar. I've been sat on multiple webinars, and I get the distinct impression from lots of people I've spoken to that we're sort of fed up with listening to the likes of Tara Dillon, etc., talking about what the government may or may not do. Actually, what I see and hear from people is we need some really pragmatic guidance now. I've got some very specific questions, and they all seem to centre around risk assessment, procedures, cleaning, myth busting. So that's the purpose of running these webinars. We're going to run a series of them over the next couple of weeks. Tomorrow we have another one which is centred around swimming pools, swimming lessons and lifeguarding. Details of which will be sent to you following this webinar. So without further ado, we're going to go straight into these questions, these frequently asked questions. We went out to all employers, and thank you to those on the call today who's contributed to this. And we've managed to collate the top 10 most frequently asked questions around risk assessment procedures and the top 10 around cleaning. So we're going to start with Ian and Gill, if that's okay, from Right Directions. I'll allow you guys to introduce yourselves before you answer the question, but seems an odd question, seems an obvious question. However, one of the most frequently asked questions is, do we need a COVID-19 specific element added to our risk assessments in our sites? Can I hand over to Gill or Ian to answer that question, please?
I am Gill Twell, as Phil's already said, Head of Development for Right Directions, worked in the industry for 30 plus years, that's all I'm going to say, and I've had lots of experience and I've learned an awful lot about COVID-19 and risk over the last 100 plus days. So regarding risk assessments, our advice to you is that you complete separate risk assessments and procedures for COVID-19. And the reason for that is, at the moment, we don't know how long this COVID-19 pandemic will go on for. So it might be 2 months, it might be 22 months. So at the moment, just do completely separate COVID-19 risk assessments and procedures. When the time is right, or at your next review, then we can start adding pandemic into our procedures and risk assessments. At this stage, what we don't want is to specifically say in your current procedures, this is going to happen about COVID-19. That will hopefully go away at some point. Talking to people out there, there is very, very few people who had anything about pandemic or pandemic within the risk assessments and procedures, and that's what we need to look at our risk assessments and procedures in the future. What the government has said on your COVID risk assessments, which is also worth noting, is that any businesses that have more than 50 employees must upload their COVID-19 risk assessments onto their websites. And we're being told that if there is any incidents or there is any reports to EHOs, that they will be looking at the websites and the quality of your risk assessments, and that might, and we only at this stage are saying might, be the catalyst whether they come out to your facility and visit you, or whether they accept that your risk assessments are adequate. So that's a bit of advice, that they need to be suitable and sufficient. Make sure you've covered everything, and when you've got to that stage, get them uploaded onto your website.
Jill, can I just ask a quick question? Do you have any templates or guidance that the attendees on the webinar can look at to guide them in the right direction?
Yeah, we've got lots of guidance on our website. We've created a COVID-19 Pacific page for on our website, so there is some downloads on there that people can go and look at. If they can't find anything Pacific that they're looking at, if they email us at info@rightdirections.co.uk, we have developed a raft of procedures, risk assessments, which will cover all of leisure. So come and talk to us.
Lovely, thank you. And there's some additional information, again, the link that Phil's put up in the chat box, the link to the CIMSPA reopening page, that's where we host the Right Directions information. So there's some guidance on how to conduct a risk assessment, things that you might want to consider. And also Jill and Ian have run separate risk assessment webinars consecutively, well, pretty much
lots of them.
Yeah, lots of them over the last few weeks. So there's some recordings available should you want to catch up in some detail. So thank you, Jill. So I think that answers the first questions, and the second was, you know, our site's expected to complete their own. Of course they are. So the next question, and I get asked this a lot, now that the social distancing rules have changed to 1 metre plus, can I or should I change my signage?
Okay, I'll take that one. For those who don't know me, I'm Ian Warren. I was originally one of the founders of one of the first leisure management contractors, and for a while managed CCL Leisure when we had 40 odd sites. So I come from this very much from an operator's viewpoint of trying to find sustainable solutions and try to make this workable for everybody. Sadly, we've heard this a lot as well. I've been out to a number of sites doing pre-audits to see how they are preempting what government might say in the procedures they're putting into place, and some people get it and some people don't. The advice the other day regarding the reduction to 1 metre plus was not a removal of the 2 metres. The 1 metre plus means what it says. Where there is 1 metre, there has to be mitigating circumstances put in place to make sure that people remain safe. Unfortunately, we do know that, and the World Health Organization this morning stated that they are beginning to accept that the aerosol around people's breath is potentially infectious. And given that we are involved in people doing vigorous exercise and instructors potentially shouting, the droplets go a lot further than 2 metres. And in our risk assessments, we need to consider this. So particularly around instructors, making sure the area directly in front of them and their first line of clientele, you should really be thinking of either a screen, if you want to keep it that short, or leaving a bigger space, because they are right in the forefront of potentially 30 people all breathing heavily towards them with the aerosol and droplets. So you do need to consider that. The reduction is not a reduction. We are still bound by 2 metres unless somehow, miraculously, you can find some mitigating circumstance, like everybody turning back to each other, which probably isn't really practical. You're muted, Tara.
Thought I'd learnt my lesson. Thanks, Ian. So there's a couple of questions just coming up in the chat box. This risk assessment advice does apply to all home nations. And there's another question around, you know, because I've got fewer than 10 employees, I'm a small gym operator, does this apply? The answer is yes, it does. And there is much more, the 2 metre rule as an example, than just risk assessment in this webinar. And in actual fact, we're probably going to cover more stuff now and not risk assessments.
Can we just go, I see one question come up, Tara, about the 50 staff. That's per company, not per facility.
Okay, do you just want to...
Gill said that where you've got more than 50 employees, the guidance is that you publish your risk assessments on your website. And that is 50 per group company, not 50 per facility. So if you've got a number of facilities and you've got more than 50 staff, you've got to put those up on the website. And if you've done them well, it will be to your benefit. So hopefully you won't get a visit from any HO because they'll see you're doing a good job.
Lovely, thank you. Ian, can you just address this? This is an ongoing question actually, that's general pre or post-COVID actually, about the 10 or less employees. There seems to be some misunderstanding. I host a public facility, but I've got fewer than 10 staff and therefore I don't need to conduct any risk assessments. Is that true?
I think actually it's 5 staff, but you still, even though you don't have to write them down with 5 staff or less, you still have to do them. You still have to either mentally or some way have a way of displaying them. And we would strongly recommend that you still do some form of risk assessment, because if your facility is linked to an outbreak, how are you going to defend yourself? How are you going to show that you've thought through the procedures, what you've got to clean, how you're going to keep distancing, and how you're going to make sure your staff and customers are safe? So we would strongly recommend, although it's anyone with under 5 employees does not have to write them down. I don't know how you would truly demonstrate that you've done something unless you do write something down.
I'll just add there, Ian, as well. You might, for anybody who has got under 5 employees, you might want to talk to your insurance company as well, because although it's not law, your insurance company might, as part of the process of insuring you, might want you to do those risk assessments as well. So a lot of people think that figure, they don't have to do them, but it is very difficult not to be able to say why you haven't done them. And as we all know, with insurance companies, they won't tell you that, but they might have got that in the small print. So it's worth just checking with your insurance company.
Lovely, thanks, Gill. If I can go on to the next question then, is there a calculation or an algorithm that we should be using for establishing building capacity?
I think we will only find that out once the government finally publish their guidance. It's quite interesting looking at the guidance that was issued last week on community facilities, so community type centres, where they are talking about no more than 30 people within any one area of a building, if your risk assessment will allow that. So clearly, if you've got a room that's a certain size, you will only get a certain number of people within it anyway. If you've got to recalculate that to being 1 person per, to allow 2 meters between any one person, that's a minimum of 4 square meters. It might even be more if you think you need room for your instructor more than 2 meters. So that the guidance will come out, which will provide us that. But if it follows what's been given to community centres, they will talk about areas within your building. So each area would be capable of taking a maximum number within it. So sadly, we can't answer that because the guidance isn't there, but there's some strong pointers in other guidance that's already out there.
Okay, and I'll just add my bit to that as well, everyone, is that it's absolutely essential that this sector is seen as collaborating and speaking with one voice. And to that end, UK Active produced the framework for COVID-19 and reopening of facilities. So it's a high-level document, and it's important, if you don't have a copy, that you get hold of a copy from the UK Active website. The relationship with CIMSPA and UK Active is that they created the high-level guidance, and that we've agreed then to create more specific guidance in interpreting the high-level piece. So in essence, running webinars like this and some of the information that you'll find on our reopening site. So on our reopening site, we've got things like sample risk assessment templates. We referred to the Right Directions guidance on it. We have information on reorienting your staff out of furlough back into work, and we've got information there for CIPD, Mind, etc. There's also stuff in there around how to re-engage with your customers. You can download signage that says, please keep 2 meters apart. There's a cleaning checklist, there's some training criteria, some training materials there. And later this week, if you haven't seen it already, we'll also be launching the reactivation learning platform, which is free to every operator in the country. It's simply every piece of guidance that sits in the UK Active Framework, every explanation of that guidance that we discuss on the CIMSPA website is now converted into an online learning platform, so you can share that with your staff whilst in furlough or in readiness for your return, which I'm hopeful is imminent. So there's lots of information out there. If you want to keep it simple, just go on the ReOpen link that Phil put earlier in the chat. It's all there. But it is essential that we remain consistent. So in the UK Active Framework, there is some guidance around the 3 square meters in a gym, for example. Also, if you look at the Swim England guidance and the STA guidance for swimming lessons, you'll see 6 square meters. All of these are calculated to ensure that a minimum of 2 meters distancing can be established between your customers. So, and the calculations exist. The only caveat I would add to that is that, as you'll all be aware, we weren't allowed to open. And the government has reviewed our guidance, and they are going to be updating UK Active imminently on any changes that they feel are necessary. Again, when you go on the reopening page, the UK Active Framework sits right at the top of our page. So that gets updated dynamically. So you don't have to sort of print it, read it, the guidance is live, if you will. But we're not actually expecting anything significant coming back from government. So let me move on to Group X. This is probably the most commonly asked question that I get. Will Group X classes really be allowed to go ahead? And particularly the question centres around studios with poor ventilation. People considering that, that air movement is a challenge, and therefore are Group X classes viable?
Yeah, I'll take that one again. I think that is one of the most commonly asked questions. I think we've got to be realistic about it. As I said earlier about the World Health Organization announcement this morning, that aerosol is certainly an aspect which they're now worried about. You want to have a well-ventilated room. Now, the guidance at the moment is that where you've got windows and doors, as long as you're not compromising your fire safety, to have those open is going to be a big step forward. If, however, you've got a room that's in a cellar that's got no fresh air, you should consider strongly whether it's going to be appropriate, certainly to have a class of any number. If you've got yoga, something that isn't high intensity, that might be more realistic than expecting you to have a full spin session in a room that's only got recirculating air conditioning units in it. You do need to be able to introduce fresh air into the room. There's no guidance on the amount quantities of that. There is some stuff from clinical guidance, but I think that's probably too in-depth for the time being. And we will see what comes out of government guidance. But where you're planning, if you've got rooms, the more fresh air you can get into it, a bit of time between classes, hopefully that should be able to enable you to think positively about reopening. And again, you're muted.
Every week. Thanks, Ian. Is there anything sites can do to improve air movement and air management?
Yeah, clearly if they've got air handling companies and specialist organisations that manage it, lots of these systems have a recirculating element on it, so they're not throwing heat out all the time. The advice is where that can be altered so it increases fresh air as opposed to recirculating. They should look at that. From a sustainability viewpoint and an environmental viewpoint, we fully understand that has negative impacts on the business and on the environment. But for the time being, while we're stuck with this pandemic, I think we have to be realistic that you don't know, any one of your members might come into a class, be asymptomatic and be spreading virus, and therefore you need to protect your staff, your other customers and your organisation as a whole. So where you can increase fresh air exchange, we suggest that you should seriously look at it.
Lovely, thank you. There's a couple of questions just coming in that I think we could probably address as we go. In answer to John Allman at Caerphilly, for those who have a CIMSPA risk assessment health and safety management package in place, is there a COVID-19 update to go with these? The answer to that, John, is yes. It's the one that I've alluded to on the ReOpening website, where we point to the right directions guidance, where you can pick up a risk assessment template and also listen to the webinar that supports your thinking in developing COVID-19 risk assessments. I'll come back to a couple of those questions in a second. Completely different subject now. Another one that I get asked almost daily is that, you know, many operators tell me, Ian, that they're opting not to open their changing rooms, at least initially, early in their reopening. However, we do need to provide toilets. What advice can you give us on managing?
Yeah, I think again it's got to be a common sense approach. We do have to provide toilets. Hopefully from childhood all of us have been taught that we should wash our hands after going to the toilet anyway. It's a reinforcement, a lot of those messages. If the person's clean, then the door handles are going to be clean. If you can prop doors open so people don't have to handle the door handles to go in and out of a facility, all the better. Signage to encourage good sanitisation and hygiene. You might be limiting the numbers in there. If it's a big room, you put some signage or some controls in process. I saw a very simple one the other day that said one person or two people from the same household, and they'd simply put one of these engaged vacant locks on the door that could be open from the outside, so if you had a problem inside you could get in, but they'd simply allowed customers to shut the door after they'd gone in if there was no one in there, and that was a control in itself. You don't necessarily need somebody stood outside monitoring the people going in and out. So think of simple solutions. Middle urinals being taken out, middle sinks being taken out by signage or plastic bags over it. If any of you have been into motorway service stations, you'll see every other urinal, probably in the ladies, every other cubicle being taken out, although I don't quite see the problem with that, or every other sink, so that people aren't stood right next to each other. So some simple solutions rather than getting too bothered by signage, and provide sanitisation units at the entrance to the toilet so people can re-sanitise their hands if they've touched things on the way in and out. And then I'm sure Christian will come on to it, a good housekeeping and cleaning regime. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There's another question here about first aid, and in particular around resuscitation. The guidance we're getting from, it's been agreed by St John's, the Resuscitation Council UK and the RLSS around resus, is that rescue breaths are not to be used, and that you just apply CPR unless there's a pocket mask. There's a very good point that pocket masks don't particularly add too much protection. I would say they do. However, the rule of thumb here is just apply CPR in the event where there is we need to resuscitate a casualty. You know, it goes without saying that first aiders and lifeguards, you know, applying resuscitation is not risk-free. However, this omission of rescue breath seems to have sort of alleviated many of the fears associated with it. We've actually got Jose Holbert from the RLSS on our webinar tomorrow afternoon, where she'll address that. If you can't attend, don't worry, we'll be posting her answers as we are with this webinar, again on our ReOpening page for you to download and digest as you will.
I think the other thing is to have PPE available for the person delivering the first aid, so a face mask in case the casualty coughs or splutters up at them will help protect the person delivering the compressions.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian. The next question I've got here was around flushing of taps and running of showers, and all of my moving water has been stagnant during lockdown. What do I need to do?
We very much hope that during lockdown you had been keeping your water moving, doing all your normal flushing and ensuring that you were turning over the volume of your hot water and cold water storage tanks each week. If you haven't, you do have a problem. You really need to get onto that now. You really need to start that water moving around your system. If anyone's going in to start that, they should really wear masks if they're turning the showers on, so they're not inhaling any aerosol from it. The other way is to fill a bucket half full of water and stick it over the shower head. So as you start running the water, you're not putting stagnant aerosol into the air, which might then unfortunately render somebody liable to Legionnosis. We don't want that at the time of COVID-19 pandemic. If you haven't been doing your checks, you really probably need to get somebody in just to take some samples, depending on the type of building you've got and how much stored water. But you do need to look at it to make sure you've got your system fully under control, your hot and cold water is operating safely, and that you can continue to operate as normal.
Lovely. Thank you. One final question. We've kind of covered a few questions overall in the answers. What do I do, Ian, if an employee who's in a high risk category doesn't want to come back to work?
I think Gill was going to take that one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there is an awful lot of managers out there who are currently doing consultation with their staff, and that's where this starts. So our advice would be to make sure that you've got a consultation process. Hopefully you've been talking to your employees throughout the last 3 months. But I do know from some employees, they're saying that their staff are getting more and more disengaged. So I start with the consultation, and we have got a one-to-one consultation form on the Right Directions COVID website, and I think it's also on the CIMSPA on the CIMSPA website as well. So that will give you a good start to what questions you should be asking. Now, regarding whether employees want to come back to work or not, and for what reason, in the first instance, if they are high risk, we need to look at whether we can redeploy them, and if we can't, then we need to, in the first instance, if we've still got other staff who are furloughed, then perhaps we leave them on furlough and bring other staff back. There is also questions around whether employees can come back or not come back to work if they are actually have a high risk partner. And again, our advice is go through that one-to-one consultation with them. You know, there is bigger issues here with staff being off and mental health, and we need to try and work out a route back into work for everybody. Now, if they've got a partner who is high risk and has been asked to shield, actually it is the responsibility of them to self-isolate away from that partner. Now that could be very difficult and a very difficult conversation, but that can be had. But again, it's all down to consultation, and it may be that you can redeploy them and they can do some work at home, or you can keep them on furlough and bring some of your other employees back. We are getting more and more questions around staff coming back and the reasons why they don't want to come back. And actually, I'm going to write a book about COVID-19 after after the 100, and I would think it's going to be about 120 days. We have had one employee, not at Right Directions, but one of our clients, who said they don't want to come back off furlough because they've got to look after their daughter's dog. Now we've looked at all the guidance, and Russie isn't saying anything about looking after dogs. And then the other one, which made me laugh, was they said they would come back to work as long as they were going to provide them with PPI. And I do wonder whether they're after the compensation for that. So this is going to prove very challenging, I think, over the next month, to get employees back into the workplace. So our advice is, make sure you do those one-to-one consultations and it's recorded, and also make sure that you seek that support from your HR department and also your occupation health provider. I think you're going to be using those people quite a lot in the next few months. Ian, do you want to add anything to that?
You're on mute now, Ian.
My mistake that time. No, I agree. I mean, I've been out to sites, and one of the instructors I saw that was showing me around and talking through the changes they were going to make, which didn't include the lead spin bike being less than 2 meters from the other bikes, had got a husband that was immunosuppressed because he had just finished cancer. He'd got both parents in hospital because they'd been knocked down during lockdown, and she was fully anticipating coming back to still running spin classes. I think, whereas even if you've got staff who want to come back, you need to counsel staff and make sure, the contrary of what Gill said, with people not wanting to come back, people are taking sensible decisions about how they wish to come back to work and whether the positions they're in, it's going to be safe for them to be in those positions. And alternative classes where they're further away in distance might, for that individual, have been more appropriate in the short term rather than in the long term. So
one thing which we have heard is working quite well as well is that organisations are actually doing a video of the centre, so actually walking the centre from the front door and showing the control measures and the changes that they put in place. This can obviously be used for both staff and for customers to try and gain some confidence in the new control measures that you're putting in place. So that process can be used for staff as well as your customers.
Okay, thank you. There's some just to add to that as well. We ran a survey about 4 or 5 weeks ago of your staff, actually, all of you on the call, and there were some pleasing statistics about I feel informed. A good sort of 60-70% of those surveyed said that they felt their employers had kept them up to date. And then they knew what was going on. However, there was an underlying trend of, whilst I feel informed, I still feel anxious. There was a good 30% of those surveyed were really quite scared about coming back. So I'd echo what Gill's saying. I know so many of you on this webinar. I know that we as a sector do this well, and that we communicate well with our staff, but we're focusing very heavily on making sure that customers understand expectations. It's absolutely essential that our staff's expectations are managed too. Again, this Reactivate training platform that we're putting live this week gives you the opportunity to do that. There's masses and masses of information for your staff to keep them up to date, to increase their confidence levels, to give them the assurances that they no doubt need. So please use it. It's free. It's Sport England have funded this. It's there for you to use. Just another interesting point, actually, from Dan Jacqueline. I wouldn't expect anything less than a clever suggestion from Dan. Is considering whether or not you stagger shifts, so you have a sort of week on, week off approach. I know that when we first went into lockdown, just before actually CIMSPA, we were looking at Team A, Team B, so that we had a sort of 2 week on, 2 week off rota system. And it's not always manageable on shifts, but it's something you might consider. And something as well that I've seen overlooked quite a lot in a lot of the reopening plans is staff rooms. So you do need to consider the use of staff rooms, communal areas for your staff, and trying to avoid overlap of shifts. If I know most of you, you would have eradicated that for staff overhead cost savings anyway, but where there's a sort of half-hour crossover, that should be avoided.
Tara, can I just working with a number of other clubs, and we've been working with the trampoline park on Jersey that has reopened. And one of the big things they did that helped them develop their controls and then made sure their staff owned and had confidence in it was that their staff actually developed the controls. They were very instrumental in building the risk assessments, identifying the touch points, identifying where they were going to have to do cleaning, identifying where there was going to be issues with congestion. And it was the staff, a lot of whom were young, a lot of whom who you would perhaps not think would follow rules or be hard to, but because they involved them every step of the way, and they predominantly wrote the controls with them, they found through the first 2 weeks of having reopened that they've had no problems. They've been able to review some of those controls as they've gone along to ease things and make it a bit more manageable. But it was the staff that owned them and the staff who developed them and now own them that's making it so successful that they're reopening.
Brilliant, thank you. It's a good advice as well in the chat box from Keely around return to work inductions. Just a question there about park use. I must get asked that one every day as well. At the moment, there is nothing to suggest that the park queue needs to alter. So we're working with Europe Active on this to see if there's any evidence across Europe where, with hindsight, park queues needed to be adapted. But the advice today is they don't need adapting at all. I think just looking at the time, I'm conscious that Christian's sat there quietly and patiently and biting his tongue, I should think. Can I just move us on to cleaning? Again, this seems to be the most frequently asked. It's at risk assessments, how do I open and how do I keep my building clean, Christian? And there's some real myths out there right now about when is a deep clean, what's a fog clean, what's an electrostatic clean, etc. And so thank you ever so much for joining us. Would you like to just sort of kick off and tell us a bit about slip safety services, and then I'm going to hit you between the eyes with some pretty funky questions that we've had from our employers.
Good stuff. Yeah, happy to be here, Tara. Thanks for asking me. I've been supporting the sector with kind of cleanliness, hygiene and safety stuff for the last 10 years or so. So I've visited hundreds, if not thousands, of centres and facilities all around the country, and given advice or provided services or in the past products as well to try and help people to improve. So got some good knowledge there. I also work with quite a few of the insurers, lawyers and people like that. So from a risk perspective, got some interesting knowledge from that perspective as well.
Lovely, thanks, Christian. So some people have, including my own team, have questioned why I'm chairing this webinar today. And the simple reason is that I spent almost all of my career in ops. So walked a mile in your shoes, and I've been a lifeguard, I've been a DM, I've been a GM and an area manager, etc. And one of the reasons why we coordinated these webinars is I was trying to put myself back in an ops position and ask myself, what is it I really need to know before I reopen my facilities? So these high level strategic discussions that make no one iota of difference to me getting my treadmills clean. So Christian, you and I were talking in the lead up to this webinar about the challenges for leisure centres pre-COVID on keeping facilities clean. And I think it's fair to say it is a challenge for us. It always has been. You know, I recall being a GM or a contract manager, and it was just, you know, I just seemed to be on repeat about cleanliness over and over again. Not because I would, you know, felt strongly about it in terms of punishing the staff for something, but it was, overwhelmingly the most common complaint we'd had from our customers. And LeisureNet have just completed, as you know, a consumer survey, and 87% of those asked what was the single most important thing when returning back to a leisure centre was cleanliness.
Yeah.
So, tell us a bit about harder breathing and aerosols and things like that, and the volume and frequency of Boris managed to say in PMQs in his inimitable way. Trouble with leisure centres is they've got lots of surfaces one might touch, and then he followed it up with a cricket ball, which was incredible. What's the truth in the amount of surfaces that you can touch in a leisure centre, and how can we mitigate against that?
Well, I think, as Ian said, we've got to hope and expect that users and members are going to be performing as much their own hygiene as they can. And I think, included in the UK Active Guidance, there's something specifically around providing sanitisers and stuff for members to use, and the expectation is, whether it happens or not, who knows, but the expectation is that members are going to be engaging in doing this and trying to help to keep surfaces clean. So wiping down equipment pre and post is one of the points mentioned. Of course, if you're doing certain types of activity, like weights, you are going to be touching a lot of surfaces, but equally a lot of activities within a leisure facility, you're probably not going to be touching much at all. Or you're only going to be touching stuff that's your kit. If you're doing a yoga class, for example, and you've got your own mat and stuff, you're not really going to be touching much that other people are going to be in contact with. So, I think there's clearly there are going to be surfaces that are going to be touched, but I don't think any more than in something like a pub or a restaurant. And I think that's where the anger, if that's the word, I think it probably is anger, is coming from the sector. Okay,
so and could you sort of help us out with some of these definitions as well, Christian? So, and there's something in the chat box, and I've asked you this a few times. So I hear about deep clean, disinfection, sanitisation. What is the difference? What is the order? If we get to, let's say we open on a week today, what do I need to do? Yeah, that would be great. What would I need to do to my facility before we open, when we open?
Yeah.
And kind of every time somebody touches something, or is it every hour? What's the frequency?
Sure. So if you look at the Fit Together framework, what it says is, there's 5 bullet points around cleaning and hygiene, and the first one is cleaning and disinfection regimes, in very simple terms. So what they're saying is cleaning and disinfection. So going back to your question about definitions, there's a difference between cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting. So cleaning is removing soiling from a surface, whether that's visible or invisible soiling. Sanitizing is reducing the amount of bacteria or viruses on a surface, and disinfection is removing viruses or bacteria from a surface. You can't disinfect a surface, which is what the guidance says, until you've cleaned it first. So what we're seeing a lot of, not so much in leisure, but in other sectors, is people going in with these kind of Ghostbusters outfits and spraying disinfectant or sanitizing fluids around, but not doing any cleaning first. And therefore your sanitizer or disinfectant chemical is landing on top of the surface. But if that surface has got any contamination on it at all, even dust, which every building's going to have if it's been closed for 3 months, it's going to mean that disinfection isn't effective. So you've got to do proper cleaning first, and then move on to disinfection. So C comes before D.
Okay, good. That's the sort of simple solution I'll need. So there's a couple of other things as well, Christian. It's just come up in the chat box actually from Craig. Thank you. What do we use? That's the other thing. There's no sort of list of approved products or all.
No, yeah.
Are they okay?
The problem is that if you did a search for a Google search for degreaser, for example, which is a common type of chemical that you might use in a kitchen, for example, you'll find there are 14 million results on Google for degreaser. So not all degreasers, I can tell you from experience, work in the same way or are as effective. You know, I've done exercises before with cleaning companies where we've had 10 different products on a kitchen floor, looking at, you know, hygienic testing results and slip testing results and aesthetics, and they all say degreaser on the bottle, but they all react in totally different ways. So it's about finding something that is going to be effective. In a lot of cases, you know, you might not need particularly strong chemicals. You know, I mean, I've been fairly vocal about, you know, we've got to get cleaning right and we've got to improve it. And as you said, Tara, the data from members backs that up. But I don't believe that, you know, every area of a leisure facility is dirty. Far from it. You know, most areas are pretty good, but there are certain environments like changing rooms and showers, you know, that across the sector have been a challenge in the past. And so, you know, what we can do in the gym, for example, is much easier from a cleaning perspective. We don't need as much elbow grease. We just need to find something that's effective and invest the right amount of time into doing it. Whereas in a shower, for example, you know, if we want that shower to be properly clean and disinfected, we need to roll our sleeves up, find some effective chemical, find some good equipment, and really give it a proper deep clean before we then look to trying to disinfect it. So what I would advise people to do, and I don't make or sell any products, so I'm totally agnostic on this, is do a process, a kind of iterative process where, you know, you get something together that you think is the most likely thing to work and try it out. Don't just launch into, I'm going to clean the whole facility. Try something out, see, just sense check that it's going to work for you, and then move on if it works. If it doesn't work, try something else and figure out, you know, what's going to work for you. Because it's not like you can say, right, use this chemical everywhere and it's going to solve everybody's problems. It's unfortunately not quite as simple as that.
Do you, Christian, this is off piece here. If I can be brutally honest, I'm a GM, my staff are in furlough. I've got to manage expectations of getting those back in. I'm trying to communicate with my members. I'm trying to read all the guidance. What would be really handy from someone somewhere is, here's a crib sheet. So for floors, use this type of cleaner. For treadmills, don't, for goodness sake, spray things directly onto that plastic, you'll wreck your kit. Use wipes. There's nothing wrong with a Hoover, provided that you clean the filter or something regularly. Yes, chlorine's okay, but don't rely on it. Use a degreaser in showers, and you can get it here, and here. Is that available anywhere? So I can just.
I think parts of that probably are available. I mean, we could certainly put something together. We've got most of this already, to be fair. That would be a bit more comprehensive. But again, it's hard to be too prescriptive, because again, you know, a descaler, you could say we'll use a descaler, but that doesn't necessarily mean that around your taps and on your pool side, that descaler is necessarily going to work for you. But at least it would be, it would give people a jump start, because they'd at least be, you know, rather than having to start from zero and from scratch, how do I do this? At least it would be giving them a bit of a framework to try.
That honestly, Christian, you won't believe how helpful and how welcome that will be for so many people. I you know, if I were an ops now, I'd be looking for that immediately. Yeah. Okay, and then just another thing. I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard, you know, that there is a magic spray you can use that you can spray on kit, and it will determine whether or not it's clean. Is that true?
Yeah. So one of the things we've been suggesting to people is to try to put a bit of science into this. So again, if you want to be disinfected, you need to be clean. But the problem is that you know, you could look at a surface, and the fact that it looks clean doesn't necessarily mean that it is clean, if that makes sense. So I use the analogy a lot of an operating theatre. If I don't know, I broke my collarbone and I had to have an operation, for example. I was run over by a car, not very pleasant. But if I'd been wheeled into the operating theatre and I saw the surgeon spitting on his hanky and wiping down the scalpel that he was going to cut me open with, I'd have been pretty reluctant to have that operation. Whereas had I been wheeled in and the scalpel was sat on the table, he could have just done that and I would never have noticed it or seen it, and the scalpel would have looked clean, but it would have been teeming with bacteria and dirt and things that I couldn't see. So trying to quantify the effective cleanliness is really important. If you were doing this kind of, how PHE would do it, they'd be going in and swab testing and sending it off to a lab. That's not reasonable or practicable for people to do. There are a couple of tests that are available. There's something called ATP, which is quite common in the food industry, which does require a bit of kit, but it measures the level of kind of microorganisms on a surface in very simple terms. So it's a very, very good indicator of how clean a surface is. And there's another product called Fresh Check, which we've been recommending people to use because it measures the same stuff, but it's a spray bottle. So if you sprayed it onto your chopping board at home, just after you chopped up some chicken to put into a stew, the chopping board would look clean, but if you sprayed it on, you would see that it's actually contaminated. If you then cleaned it and disinfected it and sprayed it again, it wouldn't change colour, and therefore it shows that it's clean. So I think that would be something that would be very useful for people watching. And there is I can send out the link. I think it's freshcheckuk.com, but somebody could maybe Google it. But if you put in CIMSPA in the checkout, I think you get 5% off or something like that. Because I sort of said to them, we're going to get a lot of leisure centres signing up for this, so you should give them a bit of a discount.
Oh, brilliant! Thanks, Christian. Awesome. Just a quick point here from Keely about specific equipment such as pole vaults and high jump bars, etc. Keely, just in answer to that, again on our reopening website, each national governing body for sport is producing some very specific guidance on their reopening procedures. So I, for the life of me, can't remember if England Athletics have produced anything yet, but I'll certainly have a look. But again, just keep your eyes peeled on that website, because there is some sport-specific guidance available, and that gets updated fairly frequently. And then the other question here, Christian, is another one from Craig around, what's your views on using hazardous products such as alcohol hand sanitizer in environments such as a gym where a static build-up is prevalent?
Yeah, I mean, there's various problems with alcohol-based sanitizers, because they do leave. I saw a study which showed that the residual effect of those is less effective than other methods, because you're effectively because it's drying onto your surface, you are leaving some residues on. Washing your hands with soap and water is I think the best advice, and that's what the guidance from PHE would say as well. So I think from a hand hygiene perspective, that's what I would be suggesting.
Okay, and then just again slightly off piece here, Christian. In my head, I'm thinking, right, okay, so I've just we just had a Group X class in the studio. Do I need to clean the floor every time between classes? Would you advise that? So I'll do some quick fire questions on you.
I would say, like in studios, what you want to try and do is think about getting up to the best possible standard throughout the facility. Get up to the best possible standard that you can for when you reopen, because the better standard you're at, then the easier it is to maintain at something like that standard. If you're starting off, not so great, then you've got to be doing a lot of cleaning between classes and things like that. Whereas if you're starting at a high level, you can do a sort of fairly minimal amount of cleaning. What I would be thinking about is, thinking about like a customer journey, and like you would when it comes to door handles and other touch points, walk through the facility and think, right, well, what's going to get touched on what frequency, and what activities are being undertaken. And just, it's as the guy said, it's pragmatic, practical risk assessment stuff. So, you won't necessarily need to be cleaning the floor, because actually, are people going to be touching the floor with their hands? They might not be. If they're not, well, how's the virus going to spread? Because remember, this is being spread through breathing, which is, the point that was touched about before, and then breathing on surfaces, and then touching the surface with your hand, and then touching your face. If you're just walking on the floor, and nobody's going to realistically touch it, then that doesn't need to be as clean as a door handle or some equipment within the gym.
Okay, excellent. So let's just talk about
I didn't really do very well at a quick fire answer there, sorry.
That's okay. So just to get in my head, I'm thinking, I've walked through so many sites that I've managed in my head over the last couple of months. So where I've got an older site where I don't have motion sense taps, for example, so we want customers to wash their hands with soap and water. How often do I need to clean the tap? The push button taps, how often do I need to clean the door handles? From the guidance we've put out, is just have a cleaning rota where you can state obviously that you have regularly cleaned it, whether it's every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, every hour. What do you recommend for those touch points?
I mean, I would be tempted, I don't know the answer specifically, but I would be tempted probably to get some advice. And I can ask this question actually and maybe report back to people, but I would be tempted to get some advice from a lawyer about this, because I think, there's two sides to this. There's, we want to do the right thing, and there's also we want to stay out of trouble. And I know, if it's, for example, doing checks in toilets, an hour is kind of common practice now. And if you're doing it less frequently than that, that's quite difficult to argue in a court, for example. There's no precedent for this, but I'd be interested to get a view. I think somebody I was talking with said, they may even be on today, was saying, well, we're going to go through the centre and we're going to do a list of kind of the touch points by frequency of touching. And so taps would be very high on that. And we're going to say, right, we're going to clean those much more frequently than, for example, fire extinguisher, which is unlikely to get touched, obviously. So I think you've got to think about footfall, and you've got to think about frequency of these touch points getting used. But I would certainly be saying, taps in that scenario, I'd want to be cleaning them several times a day for sure. I think that would be, it's all about what's reasonable. Was it reasonable? If you're standing up in court, was it reasonable that was done, or was it unreasonable? And I think it would be reasonable that they would be cleaned several times a day.
Ian, can I put you in?
Yeah, just to support what Christian said, and I think you've got to put a balance of what's reasonable here. If you're using soap and water in the first place, even if someone has touched the tap beforehand who's had an infection on it, you should then be washing your hands underneath. And if you then have to touch the door, if you're putting a sanitisation unit directly outside with a sign saying, please use the sanitizer, you are going a long way to being seen to be reasonable. Clearly, you've got to do those interim steps that Christian talked about. But in reality, we do have to get back to some level of being able to operate. And if you think you've got to go in and clean in between every person, that just is not practical. We've not seen it in supermarkets. We've not seen it when you've gone to your petrol station where you've had to pick up the pump. There's some element we've got to put onto customers through signage and through observation that they've got to be part of this solution. So yeah, a regular detailed cleaning regime enhanced by signage and encouraging people to keep themselves clean.
Excellent, thanks Ian. Christian, just on a general note then, what advice would you give everybody? How do I get it right? What are my memorable 5 things to remember about getting cleaning right here, sort of generally?
So this wasn't set up, by the way, but we've got an acronym with 5 points in about getting cleaning right, which is called ROTAS, ROTAS.
See, that's it appeals to me, Christian. Nice. Yeah. I remember C and D. Now I remember ROTAS. Right.
So this is about how to get a cleaning regime right. So ROTAS. So R is regularity. So you'll have to excuse some of these words, but I have to get it to fit somehow. Regularity. So again, the frequency with which we're cleaning surfaces. So we all now know, because of what's been happening, that certain surfaces need to be cleaned more frequently than others. If we rewind to the past and we think about poolsides, for example, they would often, in my experience, be getting a kind of something close to a proper clean, perhaps once a week. So question mark, is that sufficient to keep them clean and safe in the new world? And that's a question to be posed. O is organisation. So this is all about the management of things. So do we know what outcome we want to achieve, and do we know how to deliver that outcome? One of the challenges I've seen historically in the sector is that I've never met a general manager or an area manager or an ops director or even a recreational assistant that wanted standards not to be good. You know, everybody wants cleanliness, everybody aspires to facilities being clean, but people haven't necessarily known, you know, how to achieve what they want to get, or indeed what good looks like, you know. So if you think about, I got married, so it was my 6-year wedding anniversary on the weekend. If I tried to put my wedding suit back on, particularly after lockdown, it ain't going to happen. But that's not because I've suddenly become fat. It's just that your weight kind of creeps up on you slowly over time, and cleanliness can kind of creep up on you over time as well. T is time. So we need to allow enough time to do the task properly. So, you know, some people say I'm an expert at cleaning, but if you said to me, you've got to clean a whole changing village in 10 minutes, well, I can't do that. It's physically not possible to do that. So allowing enough time to do the job properly. A is all about staff. So it's A is for ability. And by that we mean, are they trained properly? So do they know what they need to do? Are they being supervised? And are they being motivated to do the right job? And S is system. So by that we mean, are we equipping them with the right stuff? So, you know, the traditional blue stiff bristled brushes that you don't see that many of nowadays, but still some that you would see back in the day, you know, to scrub floors with. Those aren't really that effective on many surfaces. So let's give these trained and motivated staff the right kit to enable them to do a good job. So if you can think about that as an acronym and a system, that will stand you in good stead.
Brilliant. Thanks, Christian. For me, I think also, you know, you talk about regularity and time. I don't know how everybody in the webinar feels about this, but if I were running a site now, I would be very, very visible. I would be almost purposely annoying customers by saying, sorry, you're just going to have to wait for the changing rooms to be open for the next 25 minutes while we do a deep clean. Sorry, you can't use the bank of those treads for 10 minutes while the staff are very obviously. I would really be very, very overt about our attention to cleaning. I don't think that would do any consumer confidence any harm whatsoever. In fact, quite the opposite. You know, if you don't see a person, you know, lifting a finger all day, I'm pretty certain what decision I would make. But also, you know, go back to Ian's point about making very obvious to customers that they're part of this solution too. I think it's very, very important. The one caveat I would add to that, or caution, which I don't think is going to be anything out of the ordinary for anybody or a surprise, is don't rely on it. You know, if Bournemouth Beach or Brighton Beach or the state of bloody Soho, see, I'm the first person to swear because it really annoyed me.
I wondered how long it would take.
Well, I was sat watching all of that go on at the weekend, thinking, like, pubs and restaurants are open and it looks unorganised chaos to me, and yet we can't open and we are organised and we have thoughts about it. I was quite incensed by the whole thing. But my point there is, don't rely on the public to apply common sense. Make provision for those who have got some common sense and do take it seriously, and be very visible with it. But yeah, train your staff and give them the right kit. It's essential. Yeah. Another question, I don't know that any of you guys will know the answer to this, so I might have to go and ask PHE this one, but this is from Dan Jacklin about transmission of the virus from clothing and whether or not we should ask our staff to clean their uniform more frequently. I think back to some of my recce's in the day, getting them to clean their uniform at all was often a challenge. I
can tell you that friends of mine who are kind of senior health and safety people in like cleaning support services, for example, who've got older kids who are still living with them and who are going out to work, and you know, they've been getting them to come home, go into the downstairs loo, strip off, and then wash their clothes kind of straight away. Yeah. So that's just something anecdotal, but from people that kind of, you know, are in this kind of safety and risk world. That might be a bit of overkill, I don't know, but it's just something anecdotal.
I think if you're keeping the 2 metre distancing and those systems are in place, then hopefully and you know you haven't had people in, you won't know maybe for a few days afterwards with test and trace. But I think so long as you've got rigid processes in place regarding distancing, then it might be. I wouldn't necessarily be writing it into a risk assessment.
No, and Dan, I've looked at, I'm constantly on Public Health England, Public Health Scotland websites, and whilst they are both incredibly helpful, there's very little other than the repeating 2 meters and good hand hygiene. That's over and over and over again. That seems to be the message. But if it's something you'd like me to get an answer to, drop me an email and I'll do that for you.
I think the fear, Tara, is if people write these things into risk assessments and then it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So just think carefully about those controls that you are putting into your risk assessments. Don't tie yourself up in such knots. Make it real, make it genuine, make it safe, but don't tie yourself up in knots.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing, just on relying on the public and their common sense. I think I mentioned this to you a couple of weeks ago, Christian. Would we trust a member of the public with a bottle of spray chemical in their hand?
Yeah.
What do you advise that we do issue to the public if we are going to ask them to clean stuff?
I for 2 reasons, would be uncomfortable giving spray bottles out. And I've seen some of the videos that have been published by some operators, and they seem to be split on this point. But firstly, just from an equipment perspective, there will be certain equipment within your facilities that the manufacturer will say you mustn't spray liquids onto the screens, for example. So just from that perspective, you might be invalidating warranties and causing yourself maintenance issues and things like that. From a health and safety perspective, I'm sure it won't happen, but it could happen that somebody accidentally sprays someone else or in the face or something like that. So I think I would feel more comfortable giving people wipes rather than sprays. I don't know what the guys think about that, but that would be my view.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
So just sort of antiseptic wipes. Is there any cost considerations there, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, you would maybe want to use, and I know we've talked about alcohol-based wipes. I mean, the NHS use alcohol as their basis for a lot of cleanliness. So I think alcohol-based wipes, or some of them do say they're viricides wipes that like Christian just said. I've unfortunately seen people spray themselves in the bottle because they've got the gun the wrong way around. So
yeah.
You wouldn't want to be doing that.
I think the thing with alcohol-based wipes, and indeed any sanitisation, is you've just got to be mindful of not kind of going over and over and over and over a surface, sanitising, or covering your hands with alcohol wipes, and then not doing any of the cleaning bits, because eventually you'll end up with a residue on the surface, which is then going to compromise everything. So it'd be like a petri dish for germs.
Just remember the C&D: clean first, disinfect, clean, disinfect. Yeah, okay. And then the other thing, actually, I was on a webinar the other day for everybody in the audience. Just about every kit supplier has some guidance available to you about what you can and can't use on your kit. Matrix, Live, Technogym, What Bike, they've all produced some stuff saying the do's and don'ts, and almost entirely they're recommending the use of wipes during the day. And some more specific cleaning, but they've all made it available. So, go back to your kit manufacturers and ask those questions. Okay, so just another question in. I'm glad we're able to answer some of these while we go. Tracy has asked, would you spray fabric office chairs or cover them? I think that's the same as the clothing question, Tracy, really. Is that, provided people are socially distancing, people shouldn't be contracting the virus. The only thing is, which we can do nothing about, is people are asymptomatic or asymptomatic. That's actually the more sinister part of this virus. And also, in answer to your observation, actually, or statement, Keely, about contacting customers and doing some sort of pre-opening questionnaires. Again, if you go to the CIMSPA website, on the reopening page, you'll see something from Alliance Leisure TA6, which is a kind of whole campaign called Make the Comeback. It's free, and it encourages you to interact with your customers and prepare them for reopening. It's just a free resource. I mean, it's just brilliant. And then in addition to that, LeisureNet Solutions has got the Refocus, which is on our Stronger Together hub. So there's plenty of stuff out there. You know, this isn't CIMSPA selling. We are only working with partners who are prepared to give their time and resource for free. We are not allowing anybody to sell or upsell anything product-wise. We're only actually interested in working with partners who, like us, just want to support the sector and make sure it survives on the other side. Just one final question on cleaning, Christian, and it's around this, I keep hearing this, and I alluded to it at the top, fog cleaning.
Yeah.
Do I need to get myself a fogging machine or electrostatic? What is it?
So it's a method of sanitizing or disinfecting. So basically, you've probably seen it on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever videos, but there's different types of kit, but it's basically atomizing and spraying liquid rather than using a trigger spray or a wipe. And fogging is basically blasting it all in one direction. Electrostatic is putting an electrical charge into the chemical, and that means that it kind of clings to surfaces and disperses and spreads itself more evenly. So both are very efficient ways of sanitizing or disinfecting surfaces. So we use electrostatic machines ourselves if we're doing this as a service for clients. But obviously we go and clean all the surfaces physically first. Some of the challenges that I'm seeing are that people are talking about, I can think of one operator who put a video out saying we're using electrostatic cleaning. Foggers and electrostatic sprayers don't clean anything. They're sanitizing or disinfecting, they're not cleaning. So what people are potentially seeing is they're being lured into a bit of a false sense of security, whether that's by someone selling them the kit or somebody selling them the service. You know, I'm going to come in and fog your office and it's then safe. Well, no, you need to be doing the cleaning bit first. Otherwise, that second part of it is unlikely to be effective. So I think they certainly have their place from an operational efficiency perspective. You know, thinking about doing a gym, you know, filled with equipment, those methods are going to be much quicker for you guys to use to do that sanitizing and disinfecting than doing it manually. So it's certainly worth thinking about, but you just need to understand what they are doing and what they're not doing, and make sure that you do that whole process as the Fit Together guidance framework sets out.
That's excellent, Christian. Thank you. And I've just got one more, actually.
Okay.
So an action out of this is that you're happy to help us come up with a sort of list of what cleans and a list of what disinfects. You know, if I'd stick that in my cleaning cupboard, I think, for Rakis or whoever's doing the cleaning, just say, here you go, clean first, disinfect with this.
Yeah.
Clean this frequently and disinfect it this frequently. You know, just a really plain and simple guide per area would be fabulous. I know we were going to talk about swimming pools and chlorine and all the rest of it, but we're kind of running out of time slightly. Plus, I'm also covering all of that tomorrow.
Yeah. All I'd say on swimming is, you know, swimming in a pool is probably the safest thing you could do in a leisure facility right now, from a COVID perspective.
Yeah. And it's interesting, again, myth busting. There's been lots of, you know, talk about air circulation and whether or not swimming pools are man enough for the job. Just think about it. Just use common sense. The size of the pool halls are usually much larger than a standard office or a pub, and therefore dilution rates are increased. There are often high humidity rates in swimming pools, and the virus molecules in high humidity drop quicker to a surface than they are airborne in a swimming pool. So there are loads and loads of pluses, plus chlorine levels at a certain, you know, at the correct levels. there is some evidence that they're effective against the virus. Just to give you a bit of an update on that, the chlorine kills the virus is a theory, and it's a worldwide theory. However, it's not yet been proven, and the UK is looking like it's going to be the first country to prove it. There are some tests and research being undertaken as we speak, Wednesday, Thursday of this week. So I'll keep you guys posted, but I actually think we'll be open before we get the results. But it would be nice, you know, to prove that story.
Yeah, I mean, Public Health England specifically talks about a chlorine-based solution to use for disinfecting in the event of a known case. But all I would say is that the dilution rates that they talk about for that are significantly higher than you would find in a pool. So, you know, it's like anything, you know, if it's at a different level of concentration, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in the same way. So, you know, we need to see proper testing. But every scientist I've spoken with about this, you know, when I ask them about swimming in a pool, everybody thinks, you know, that's a safe thing to do.
Yeah, and one of the professors, Dr. Helen, who sits on, she sits as an advisor on SAGE, also sits in the PUTAG working group around this. So there's some consistency there. There's a question about saunas and steam rooms, which if anybody, I don't know if Ian and Gill can help us out on that one. I've heard all sorts of answers to that question. What's the advice on opening saunas and steam rooms?
I think it's as much a sustainability issue, because to keep social distancing within that close confines is going to restrict how you manage that facility. If you can make it work financially, that you can have 1 or 2 people from one household in there at any one time, depends on how big your facility is, of course. If you've got a huge sauna, you can have as many people as you want, as long as they're 2 metre distant. But I think you've got to think those things through. I think it's as much to do with your own sustainability issue and how you manage the control of people in and out, and particularly the harder surfaces in a steam room, the cleaning of those potentially in between.
Yeah. Quick question, Gill.
Can I just add to that? When we did our clinics, our very first clinic was about a response plan. And the question that we posed to people at that point was, the first thing you need to ask yourselves is, what facilities we're going to open. So some organisation might have 20 facilities, and the first question is actually, were we going to open all 20, or are we going to open 25%? The next question, it was to ask yourselves, once we know what facilities we're opening, actually what activities and what facilities are we going to open in each of those sites. And we actually said that health suites and saunas and steam room would definitely be at the bottom of those lists. When we reopen, we're going to reopen in a new norm. Some people might say that gyms and fitness classes are going to be the easiest part to open. So let's get the ones open which A, are easier, and secondly are going to generate your income. Let's be honest here. Health suites probably don't break even at the moment, and why add extra risk into what's going to be quite a stressful time for a lot of people when they reopen. So our advice would be, yes, you can open them, but think carefully about that, and let's maybe put that at stage 2 or stage 3 or even stage 4, because they are going to be harder to mitigate the risk on those activity areas.
Yeah, Jill, that's great. Okay, listen, we're going to have, I think we could probably go on forever, but we've got 6 minutes before it's 4:30. So first of all, thank you guys for your time and for your expertise. I've learned an awful lot from this session, so thank you very much for that. for those who are on the webinar, it's an incredible number who stayed on, so well done. We'll ask for feedback, but we're not just asking for feedback, you know, did you enjoy it? You know, do you like Phil? He's got a lovely t-shirt on or anything like that. We're also very interested to know if you want to know more and whether or not you'd like us to run another one of these and ask some more specific questions. My gut feeling says that these won't stop even when we're open. I think once we're open, we're going to start having more and more questions that we need to address. So we'll carry on. Again, just a reminder, Phil, is it 2 o'clock tomorrow, mate?
It's 2:30 with Swim England and RLSS. Yeah, I've put the link in the chat box for anyone that hasn't booked into that webinar.
Yeah, we'll just keep running them. You know, let us know. Let us know what you need. That's our job, is to provide answers for you, and it's what we're paid to do. So keep talking to us, and we'll keep going to get experts like these guys to talk back to you. Thanks for your time, everybody. Thanks for your thanks in the inbox. Phil, you'll be sending out all of the annotated.
Absolutely, yep. So everyone who's attended this webinar, you'll receive all the notes, all of the questions with the answers that we've gone through, and you've, as Tara mentioned, you'll get the opportunity to give us your feedback, which we'll look forward to.
Brilliant. Thank you very much all. Enjoy the rest of the week, and let's hope for some good news this week. Take care. Bye now.